Yeah, so like I said, my name is Tucker Brauer, Regional Fisheries Biologist here, oversee the Big Wood River. And as that first slide would suggest, I'm here to talk about the Big Wood specifically tonight. Yeah, first off, I appreciate the invitation to come out and talk to you guys. You guys are one of the most engaged groups of anglers I've ever worked with in my career. It's great to see you guys involved, and this is a great turnout for one of these meetings. And yeah, I appreciate it. And it's great to hear you guys are doing great things like funding scholarships. I was a recipient of a few of those scholarships during my time as an undergraduate, and it certainly helped pay the bills at times. And once in a while, bought a six-pack of beer or something. So definitely benefited from those, and it's good to hear you guys are doing it. But now that I buttered you up, time to piss you off. Tonight I'm going to talk a bit about a lot of things. We've been doing a lot of work on the Big Wood the past couple years, trying to address some troubling things we've seen in our data set over time. First off, though, I'm going to talk a bit about the management history of this fishery, just because it provides pretty important context for some of the things I'm going to bring up later in the presentation. We'll be going over some population survey data we collected all the way back from 1990 through this last year when we did our last survey this last September. We'll be talking about a creel survey we conducted on the Big Wood this last fishing season, pretty intensive survey there to get at how the fishery itself is performing. Then just kind of tie it all together and talk about next steps, specifically with management direction for the Big Wood River. And of course, you guys will have a chance to ask questions and throw rocks at me. So starting out with the management history, prior to 1990, the Big Wood River fishery was a completely different fishery than what it was today. Namely, harvest was the main difference. Back before 1990, this was a very harvest-friendly fishery. It was highly used, so a lot of angler effort was expended on the Big Wood on an annual basis. And it was high exploitation, so people were out there to harvest dinner. Starting in 1990, the current regulations that you all know today went into place. Since that, I call today's regulation strategy more of a mosaic, because it really has everything you could in terms of fishing regulations. You have general regs, harvest-friendly regs, slot limits with harvest restrictions, catch and release angling, you have seasonal closures. Pretty much everything you could implement on a fishery is currently in place on the Big Wood River. That said, it's relatively harvest restrictive these days. It's a major difference from the historical fishery. And it has changed pretty starkly from a high-use, high-exploitation fishery to still a high-use fishery, but not very many people are harvesting fish. It's effectively zero these days. To evaluate these management strategies over time, we conduct regular monitoring efforts. Now, prior to 1990, some of you in this room have probably been around since then, fished the river for over 30 years. You knew that a lot of things were going on with this fishery, including massive expansion of the Big Wood River human population, a lot of development in the river and everything. And because of that, we've implemented a lot of targeted research in the basin. And essentially, ever since the 1990, when these regulations went into place, we've been doing electrofishing surveys every 3 years. We monitor one transect in each regulated section of the Upper Big Wood, so one in the slot reach, one in the catch and release reach, and another in the general reach north of the SNRA. During these surveys, we're measuring fish density, so how many fish are out there, what the species composition, mountain whitefish, rainbow trout, brown trout, brook trout, and measuring dynamic rates such as growth rates, mortality rates, recruitment rates, essentially just getting a picture of what the population is doing. Another way we've measured this fishery over the past is angler creel surveys. So this is when we actually go out and speak to anglers. The point of these surveys are to evaluate the fishery itself, which is different from the fish population. So during these surveys, we measure fishery performance. We're looking at things like estimating total effort, harvest rates, and a big portion of these are also interviewing anglers and finding out their satisfaction level, what anglers value. The most recent one of these, like I mentioned, was in 2024, which I'll be sharing with you tonight. But yeah, overall, we're evaluating the fishery from multiple directions, looking at the population itself and the fishery. I'm missing skip the slide, sorry. But like I said, prior to 1990, this fishery was very different. We had high harvest rates. A lot of anglers were out there catching dinner. With population expansion occurring in the valley here, a lot of anglers were concerned about the long-term effects of that harvest and that habitat degradation from development, what those effects were on the fishery. Given those concerns, Idaho Fish and Game implemented a 3-year targeted research project that combined electrofishing, habitat, and creel surveys to essentially answer that question. You know, are more restrictive regulations necessary to prolong the productivity of this fishery over time? And the results of this research were pretty surprising. Overall, the fishery was a high-quality fishery. It had moderate trout density. The trout in the fishery were very fast-growing. It had growth rates that rivaled other blue ribbon trout streams like the Henry's Fork of the Snake or Silver Creek. It grew big fish and quite a few of them. Like I said, it was a high-use, high-exploitation fishery. Depending on the river section, we had harvest rates of anywhere from 30 to 90%, which is astronomically high. But the big finding of this research was that the fishery didn't have any problem sustaining that level of harvest. Plenty of spawning habitat was available, fish were being produced, and they were growing to a length that was harvestable by anglers. There was plenty of recruitment going on. The angler demographics were a lot different than they were today too. So as opposed to today, which I'll get into some more of this, what it is currently, but at the time, we had a pretty even 50-50 split between fly anglers and bait and lure anglers. And harvest was obviously, given the amount of harvest going on, a very important facet of this fishery. Those opportunities were really important to anglers. So much so that when interviewed in 1987 and 1988, 40% of anglers said that they would quit fishing the bigwood altogether if they couldn't harvest fish. So it was a very important thing. So, we had support for harvest regulations, for broad harvest regulations at the time. Effectively, the biology said that, it could support it. Why did we change regulations? Well, it was a long and horrible occurrence. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about, but effectively, before this research was finalized, public pressure mounted. Our commission was essentially, I won't say pressured, but pressure mounted to the point where they made a decision, and that was to implement restrictive regulations on the bigwood based on public outcry. Well, as you'd expect, half the angling public was pretty pissed off about that decision. And as a result, they sued our commission, effectively. They organized and sued our commission, and as a result, the resulting litigation fell in their favor. A judge ruled that, yes, Idaho Fish and Game, the commission had to provide a variety of different user groups opportunity on the river. So that's how we came up with this mosaic that's currently managing the fishery. And I got that over here, but talking about electrofishing surveys and how we monitor these things over time since the regulation change. So now I'm going to talk about the results of some of this monitoring. Now, for those of you in the room who listened to this talk a couple years ago when it came in, our most recent survey was from 2021. And at that time, I mentioned to you guys that we're seeing pretty exponential growth in the trout densities in the Bigwood River, specifically talking about rainbow trout here, red band trout. We were seeing this pattern of just survey after survey, just more and more fish in this river, which at face value is great, But again, after this last 10 years, we have seen effectively exponential growth in trout densities in the Bigwood. Yeah, you're probably thinking, it's awesome, more fish, more to target, higher catch rates, life is good. Well, unfortunately, those densities are coming at the expense of size structure. So this fishery that historically has produced large fish, and quite a few of them, has effectively disappeared. So this might be kind of hard to see on this graph, but this is size distribution of all our fish samples for the past 38 years, I think, math. I don't know. But this horizontal dotted line, that to the right of that are fish over 16 inches that are available to anglers in the Big Wood River. You can't read it probably. I can barely read it, but that top panel is from 1987. Okay? At that time, we had about 5% of our catchable recruited fish population being over 16 inches in length. So that's indicative of a high-quality trout fishery. Now, coming down through the years, survey after survey, we get to 2024 here on the bottom panel. Right now, that is 1% of our trout population exceeds 16 inches. So we've seen an 80% decrease in the available number of quality fish in our fishery, despite regulations that are supposed to be providing quality trout fishing opportunity. So instead of these large fish that were present before, we've now shifted the size structure of our population to being way dominated by small fish under 10 inches in length. We have a zillion mouths out there, but you just don't find large fish often in the Big Wood like you should. Now, as you'd expect, that has implications on growth, that density. So what we think is happening is essentially we're reaching carrying capacity in the Big Wood River. We have a set amount of food out there available to trout, and we have more mouths than ever dividing it up. So growth rates have started to suffer. The one cool thing we did in the 2024 survey is we collected a lot more data than we usually do. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, we did have to sacrifice more fish than usual so we could come up with these numbers. But overall, what we were trying to find out is, these high density and low density reaches, do you see different dynamic rates between them? Is that density, as it increases, negatively affecting growth rates, mortality rates, things like that? And as far as growth goes, we found that is the case. So these highlighted numbers here, this is essentially in millimeters, sorry, I'm a scientist, from the upper reaches that we sample, so the Boulder Reach up above SNRA, this middle one here, this 474, is the catch and release section by Gimlet Bridge, and the Haley section down by Lyons Park. You can see as you go from low density reaches to high density reaches, you see a pretty substantial decline in the growth potential of your average trout. Going from the highest growth potential in the Boulder Reach, so where we see the lowest density of trout, and coincidentally the only place during our surveys where we caught a fish larger than 20 inches, we have the growth potential resources to produce essentially a 24-inch trout. In the Gimlet Reach, the catch and release section, that reduces to about 19-inch trout. When you get down to Haley, we can barely produce a 16-inch trout, which is supported by the data because we didn't find any 16-inch trout in the Gimlet or the Haley Reach, sorry, which is the slot section. Go ahead.
Is that generic trout? Like, does that include like stock and the red band?
This is all wild fish.
Oh, wow.
So these are primarily red band trout. There might be some genetically not pure, coastal strain in there, but this is all wild trout. We're pretty good at identifying hatchery fish versus the wilds in the system, and pretty much once you get out of the Boulder Reach, you don't see hatchery trout anymore.
Wild rainbow trout.
Wild rainbow trout, sorry. Yeah, we're not talking about brown trout or anything like that. But like I say, we're seeing evidence that these high densities are affecting growth potential, which is concerning. Again, this is a river that produced 16 and over fish pretty regularly years ago. When you look at the sample of growth rates across years, we see the same pattern. So the last three surveys, 2018, 2021, and 2024, again, we're seeing those densities increase, and we're seeing growth potential for the whole system combined. So these are fish that we sample throughout the whole system, summarized. We're seeing that growth potential tick down along with increased density. Mortality rates, we're also seeing some concerning things. Again, so going upper system to lower system, we have lowest rainbow trout density stretch on the upper there, the Boulder Reach, going down to the Haley Reach where we have your highest rainbow trout density. We see the same pattern as growth as we do with mortality rates. So as density increases, depending on the river reach, we see mortality increase pretty substantially. Now, on average, we have about a 55 to 60% total annual mortality rate in the Big Wood River. That's basically, every time we sample this, that has been the mortality rate. And what that means is, say you have 100 fish, there's a theoretical population of 100 fish in January. By December that year, 40 are going to be left. Regardless of if an angler eats that fish, whether an osprey eats it, it dies of old age, whatever. 60% of the fish in this river die in a given year, okay? And that includes these guys all the way to these guys. That's been constant since prior to the regulation change. The main difference, and the concerning thing here, the main difference is back then, a huge proportion of that total annual mortality was due to angling harvest. So, I mentioned we had, 30 to 90% exploitation rates in the Big Wood prior to that regulation change. And we still had 60% total annual mortality. We effectively have 0% harvest in the Big Wood. You guys don't like eating trout, apparently. Which I can't blame you. It's not my favorite, but you guys really don't like it. And that's concerning because that means 60% of this population is dying of natural causes, effectively. And a lot of that, we have a feeling, is due to that resource limitation. These fish aren't growing. They're running out of resources. They effectively are just dying before they should. And that's all the survey data I'm going to share with you. But just to recap it before I get into the creel data, again, we're seeing massively increased densities in the Big Wood River, which is great if you want to just catch a lot of fish. It's awesome. But with that higher density, lower growth potential, higher mortality rates. And again, similar to what I mentioned prior with the targeted research before 1990, we have no problem producing fish in the Big Wood River, obviously. What we have a problem with is growing those fish to a size that you guys want to catch, quality sized fish. So now we'll talk about how the fishery itself is performing. So again, we use creel surveys to evaluate what's going on in the fishery. Are anglers satisfied? How much time are anglers spending on the river? How much effort is being expended? What harvest rates look like? All sorts of things we collect using creel surveys. We conducted one from May 2024 through March 2025 this last year. So we expanded an entire fishing season with this creel survey. Now, I just want to make a note, that is a huge creel survey. We usually use what's called index creels, where we pick the highest use period in a fishery, and that's when we creel and collect our information. In this case, we knew the importance of this data. We went out for the entire fishing season at great expense and effort. So we got a very clear picture of what these metrics we wanted to know, what they were. So during that time frame, our survey design required us to sample 18 days a month. So we were out counting anglers and conducting angler interviews 18 days a month. That was split evenly, 6 days in each river section. So 6 days in the catch and release section, 6 days in the slot section, and 6 days in the general reg section. Again, we were measuring angler effort, harvest rates, and overall catch. A big part of this was evaluating just angler preferences, angler values. So we wanted to know, were anglers satisfied with the Big Wood River fishery as it currently is? And we also asked anglers to rank fisheries characteristics that were important to them associated with the Big Wood. So things like opportunity to catch, high catch rates, opportunity for trophy fish, simple regulations. We want to know if they valued, it's on the next slide, I should remember it, harvest opportunity and year-round fishing opportunity. So we wanted to find where those fishery characteristics that we can manage for actually fell out in what's important to you guys. So the results of this, we did creel surveys for 167 days of the prior fishing season. And I just had to make this. This is my first job at Idaho Fish and Game. I found this photo. That's me when I was about 17 years old. I was on Silver Creek, and I don't think that person's in the room. I don't know. It's been a while. But we creeled 167 days. We conducted 888 individual creel surveys, so 888 anglers we contacted. Of those, that was comprised of 777 individual anglers. So I broke that out because every angler, whether we interviewed you once or interviewed you 20 times, we wanted to know how long you'd fished, how many fish you caught, how many fish you harvested, all that good stuff. But that 777, we only interviewed anglers one time for the value-based portion of the interview. So we didn't want one person that we interviewed 20 times to have 20 data points skewing, overall satisfaction rates of the fishery. So 777 individual anglers were spoken with. 87% of you were fly fishermen. So obviously fly fishing has gained in popularity in the Big Wood. 8% were lure anglers and 5% were bait anglers. So a pretty far cry from the 50-50 split we saw prior to 1990. Another thing we asked in this survey was frequency of use. We wanted to know, who was fishing. Are these people that are fishing it every day out their back door? Are they fishing it once or twice a year? So we asked anglers if they were infrequent, intermediate, or frequent users of the Big Wood. We found was 56% of anglers were infrequent users, so people that use the fishery 0 to 5 days in a year. Intermediate users, or people that fish it 6 to 14 days a year, comprised 17% of our sample, and then 27%, so over a quarter, were frequent users, so those of you who fish it 15 days or more a year. So now getting into some of the results, modeling results. So I have to give credit to our fisheries biometrician. He is a creel analysis genius out of our Nampa research office. He's Josh McCormick. He ran these numbers for me, and I trust these with my life. He is a super genius. Total observed effort that we actually observed. So when we went out and asked an angler, like, how long have you been fishing today? You tell me 2 hours. Are you done fishing for the day? Yes, great. We record that. We observed 1,312 hours of angling effort over those 888 interviews. Based on our modeling results, we estimate that the Big Wood River receives about 37,147 hours of angler effort annually, which is pretty comparable to what it was prior to 1990. Different methods were used in the creel surveys prior to 1990, so they're not super comparable, but they estimated effort at about 60,000 angler hours, but they have a high level of variance, which kind of crosses this. So it's effectively the same amount of effort these days, 30 plus years later. Then we looked at catch rates based on the number of fish you guys reported catching and releasing or harvesting. Now I'm just talking about trout in general here. So this does include brown trout, rainbow trout, brook trout. Rainbow trout do comprise most of the catch in the Big Wood River because it's over 90% of the total fish population are rainbow trout, or red band. We estimated, based on our modeling, that the total catch in the Big Wood is 45,484 trout annually. The really interesting part here is total harvest was estimated to be less than 200 fish out of those 45,000 fish that were caught. Again, harvest does not seem to be a limiting factor here. I say that because we get a lot of calls from folks. Maybe somebody in this room, they get worked up about, maybe seeing someone take a stringer full of fish home or a bucket full. Effectively, at a population level, we do not have any harvest going on in the Big Wood. Now, what's interesting about this is we also do tagging studies in the Upper Big Wood. Some of you, has anyone here ever caught one of our tagged fish in the Big Wood? Big old anchor tag. It's got a tag number or phone number. You call them, tell us you caught it, whether you harvested it, where you caught it. We've been doing those pretty intensively over the past 3 years to get at angler use rates. It's another way we can monitor angler use. And exploitation rates. So at what rate are people harvesting fish out of the population? Based on our tagging data, we have about 15 to 20% of the trout in the Big Wood are caught in a given year. Okay, again, 20% or 100% of those are being released effectively. So that means we have some pretty basic math, about 250,000 fish available to anglers in the Big Wood. So we have a ton of fish out there, and none are being harvested. So talking a bit about
Tucker,
go ahead. We'll back up.
I'm just looking at the numbers of brook trout.
Mhm.
You're saying there were 500 brook trout caught in the catch and release section?
Yes. They're in there. We find them in our electrofishing surveys.
Even people don't know what a brook trout is.
That's the thing.
It's
We do.
possible with brown trout.
Part of the downfalls is we have to trust you guys aren't lying to
No,
us.
no,
so.
I mean, I can see it in the other section.
Yeah,
lower
yeah.
section.
You know, as an aside, like brook trout, we find those all the way down through Haley. They're a small proportion of the fish community, but they are present in the entire Big Wood. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know in the creeks and stuff.
Yeah.
You kind of want like Cathedral Pines,
Yeah.
because they're the boulder section, yeah.
Yeah, they're in the boulder section. Generally, yeah, they're coming from tributaries, but we
Yeah,
can
they're
find them in
coming
the
in
main
from
stem.
tributaries there.
Makes sense.
General Ricks.
But yeah, talking about just overall angler satisfaction as a result of these surveys. So this is another interesting thing I found. So we asked anglers to rate their satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 being you're dissatisfied with the fishery, 2 being somewhat dissatisfied, 3 being neutral, you know, you could go either way, 4 somewhat satisfied, you know, there's room for improvement, and 5 is satisfied, you know, it's great. Overall, you know, when we took the whole sample mean, it was effectively a somewhat satisfied, right at a score of 4. So people are satisfied with the Big Wood, but it does appear that there's some room for improvement in your guys' eyes. When we broke that up by frequency of use, so you know, do opinions change based on how often you fish the Big Wood? We did see a statistical difference between infrequent and frequent anglers. We did see a substantial enough to be statistically different. So frequent anglers are about a 3.9, so you're a little less than somewhat satisfied. Infrequent anglers, about a 4.2, so a pretty substantial difference there. So it appears that people that are familiar with the Big Wood, they fish it often, definitely are more in tune with the fishery and probably see some of its shortcomings, I would guess. But when we broke things up by like demographic, like bait anglers, lure anglers, and fly anglers, it's pretty much a wash. Everyone was equally satisfied. So it seems like familiarity with the Big Wood does seem to drive some of the satisfaction with the fishery. So now we look at what characteristics in the Big Wood or in a fishery people value out of those anglers on the Big Wood. So this is kind of a weird graph. The shorter the bar here is the higher ranked fishery characteristics. So the smaller the number, the more important it is to anglers, the mean of our sample. So how this ranked out is pretty interesting. So catch rate, so high catch rates of fish was the most important, far and away most important fishery characteristic for anglers on the Big Wood. Second place was essentially a statistical tie between trophy fish opportunities and year-round fishing opportunity. So effectively, first place was catch rate, second place was you wanted to catch lots of fish, you want to catch big ones, big surprise, and you wanted to fish year-round. You want to have expanded opportunity to maybe fish in that spring closure period. Third place was simplified rule structure. So it didn't seem to be too difficult. And you know, it makes sense. When the majority of you are fly fishermen practicing catch and release, you really don't have to pay attention to harvest regs or anything like that. You know, it's pretty simple on that. We did see some difference between bait and lure anglers in this regard. That ranked higher, simplified rules. But for the whole mean, all the anglers we interviewed, simple rules ranked third place. And no surprise, far and away, the last place was harvest opportunity, was the least important fishery characteristic for anglers of Big Wood. So just kind of wrapping that up. Again, we've shifted in how this fishery is managed, and that's resulted in going from a high-use, high-exploitation fishery to a high-use, low-exploitation fishery. We have satisfaction with the fishery, but you know, in my mind, and looking at the data, it seems like there is a general feeling that there could be some improvements made, which you know is supported by the reductions in size, structure, quality we've seen in our survey data. You guys want to catch a lot of fish, which currently we're A+ in that. We have a lot of fish out there to catch, but you also want to catch larger fish. okay? Which is something we're lacking for sure. And year-round opportunity does seem to be of interest to you guys in general. Again, harvest opportunity is the lowest priority, and this harvest regulations are the major lever we have to kind of address the issue at hand, which I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. I did a little exercise, but before that, just kind of tying this all together. Again, we know what you guys value in general. And based on our population survey data, the creel survey data, it seems that the current rule structure isn't producing the fishery that they were set out to produce. We don't have the quality fishery that we want to see. And a lot of that is driven by that high density that I've been talking about earlier. Based on all this data, this fishery can easily support expanded opportunity, whether that be in the form of expanded seasons, less gear restriction, more harvest opportunity in general. And based on that, we have the current population dynamics to support that, and we also have the historical context. Back when, this is the same fishery we're dealing with today, at periods of high harvest, it could produce that quality fishery that it did. So we know it has the potential to do that. And again, based on all that, we think that it's time to rethink our fisheries regulations on the Big Wood. How we plan to do that is through a working group. And I'm gonna talk about that more here in a minute. But this last week, I got curious and implemented a little modeling exercise here, just to give you guys an idea of the effect some expanded opportunity on the Big Wood would look like. So I used here what's called a yield per recruit model. It's a pretty standard model we use, fisheries biologists use to evaluate potential rule changes. We can model things like in this case, modeled angler exploitation rate, so increasing angler exploitation, harvest rate, and what that would produce in terms of size structure, specifically the number of fish in the population above that quality size classification, so fish 16 inches and greater. So how we got to this, implemented all the data we have from our population surveys, kind of tweaked the mortality rates, because that's the main thing driving this when you're talking about harvest. So in this case, as I mentioned, we've got 60% total annual mortality right now, no harvest. And that's what this has produced. We have effectively less than 1% of our population is of that quality size. As we increase fishing pressure, fishing mortality, fishing-related mortality, we see a thing with this fishery that's unique, is it's called compensatory mortality. So as you increase fishing harvest, natural mortality drops to essentially compensate for that increase in mortality from fishing. It's pretty common in trout populations, and we've got evidence of it, again, from the previous time when that total annual mortality rate is constant, even though fishing pressure is really high. Now we have no fishing pressure, it's remained constant. So it's modulating to compensate for that change in fishing mortality. But this models essentially that phenomena. As exploitation rate increases, it goes up to what's common in other trout populations. So an exploitation rate of 15 to 25%, okay? So if we increase harvest to bring it up to levels that are common in most trout populations, exploited trout population, we do have the potential to increase, anywhere from a 2.5 to 6-fold increase in the number of 16-inch and above trout in the Big Wood. Thing about this though is, that six-fold increase is 25% exploitation. I mentioned before, exploitation is 0. Use is only 20%. So that would mean every single fish that gets caught in the Big Wood would have to be harvested year after year after year in order to see that level of increase. So, I don't expect you guys, if harvest as a result of this working group is opened up, we have general regs, I don't expect you guys to change who you are overnight and start harvesting like crazy. The point of this, though, is to describe that, harvest is not the boogeyman that, a lot of people think it is. It can do good. In this case, some expanded harvest opportunity could result in some larger fish in the big wood available to you guys. But that was just to start, open that can of worms. Talking about the angler working group. I'm bringing this up this is how we plan to address this complicated issue of what these regulations should look like going forward. Our plan is to solicit this group and really every shareholder group of the Big Wood River, from fly fishermen, from Hemingway TU, other angling groups, bait fishermen, lure fishermen, guides, outfitters, NGOs, agency. We want everyone that has skin in the game regarding the Big Wood to be represented on this working group. We're thinking 10 to 12 individuals. And essentially, this working group is going to be tasked with developing rule proposals that will be brought to the commission. Currently, we're early on in the rulemaking process. This process will hopefully start. We'll be soliciting some applications for the working group and choosing people. And correct me if I'm wrong, we're hoping by the end of January to start meeting with this group. Okay, so within the next few weeks, we're going to be putting out some press releases and inviting you guys to have input on this process. We're going to be meeting as a group over the next probably year and a half, developing proposals that will go to the commission in March of 2027. And if those proposals are approved, public support, those rule changes will go into effect January 1st of 2028. So, why are we going through all this trouble? Obviously, we could propose, make up proposals by ourselves tomorrow and put them forth, but we know that's not a popular way of doing business. This working group model has worked for Idaho Fish and Game in a lot of different contentious subjects, such as setting elk seasons, salmon seasons up north, all kinds of things. We realize that when there's chance for expanded opportunity, regardless of the resource you're talking about, it should be left up to the public to decide how that opportunity is allocated. Again, this is your guys' resource, should be heavily involved with the decision-making process. And we know, again, from the past and past litigation, that this is the way to make these decisions. And again, the end goal is pretty simple. I put this up just in my mind. I would like, where there's opportunity, we should give it. We should have simple rules. We should make this fishery more inclusive, and make everybody have the same opportunity to experience this fishery in some regard, and have their bit of what they value out there available. And obviously we want to make fishing better for everyone, and hopefully that'll be a result of this process. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. I'm really curious to see how the process shakes out. But that's all I've got for you. If you guys got any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Tucker, let me start.
Okay.